Good morning and welcome everyone to the State of Our Nation webinar. I hope you're looking forward to an interesting hour hearing about the power of data. I'm Kari Gerstheimer. I'm the Chief Executive of Access Social Care. Just some housekeeping to get us started. Firstly, just to let you know that your mics and cameras are off. We're using webinar format today. Please note also that the chat is disabled. You can use the Q&A to pose questions as we go, and we'll endeavour to answer as many questions as we can towards the end of the session. So for the best view of the webinar, you may want to switch your view to speaker mode if you're not there already, and that will make the person that's speaking large on your screen. Okay, so let's get started. Since we founded Access Social Care in 2020, we've developed a reputation as the leading health and social care rights charity. We're a legal charity with a difference, and that difference relates to the way that we are using data to evidence problems with social care, and increasingly that difference really relates to the way that we're working collaboratively with public bodies and community stakeholders to drive system level changes to quality, policy and practice. Since 2021, we've been leading a collaborative data project, working with helpline organisation partners to combine our data to produce a State of Our Nation report. The report is now in its third year, and it tells a damning picture about the state of social care in our country. I'd like to kick off by introducing our panel today. Panel, I will invite you to tell us a bit more about your roles and what you love about data. So firstly, I'd like to introduce Amit, the Head of Data at Access Social Care. Amit, can you tell us about your responsibilities and why you love data?
Sure, Kari, thank you. I think the main duty is to ensure that Access consumes and produces high quality data that solves simple problems, right? There's all kinds of complex and simple problems. I think it's important to kind of address simple ones first. It is also kind of my priority to understand that data is tech and there's a tech stack, but data is also human. And what that means is we need to make sure that the people at Access are empowered to digest. They feel empowered to participate in this data civilization that we live in now. Also our general public and our partners. It's important to kind of bring the data level up in addition to doing those complex things. So I think that's my role. In terms of why I like data or why I love data, I see data as a ball of yarn that if you keep rolling it around and looking at it this way and that way, eventually you'll find a string that you can pull, and that gets at the truth. And you always find that. So I think that's what I love about data.
Fantastic, thanks Amit. So next up, Hannah. Hannah is a legal manager at Access Social Care and the data lead in our legal team. Hannah, can you tell us about your role and why data matters to you?
Sure, thank you, Kari. So as Kari said, I'm a legal manager here at Access and the data lead within the team, and it's my job to provide subject matter expertise on legal frameworks and sector insight to Amit and our technology team. And together with Amit, I author the State of the Nation report. Why do I love data? I think we can ask different questions of data as our learning develops over time, particularly with this type of project. So our questions will change and the power of the data itself will change as we ask those questions. So it's a refreshingly agile approach to legal insight.
Great stuff, thank you. I'm also delighted to welcome our prestigious panel guest, Rosario Piazza, Chief Insight Architect from Joseph Rowntree Foundation. Before moving to JRF, Rosario was data lead at New Philanthropy Capital, where he was responsible for leading the charity's data strategy and providing thought leadership on the effective use of data and impact measurement. Rosario, welcome. Can you tell us about your responsibilities at JRF and what you love about data?
Absolutely, and thanks for having me. What an intro. Right. So I work for JRF, which is the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. It's social change organizations that act as a funder. So we fund project and other charitable organizations, but we also do think tank work. So we produce reports on poverty and related issues. My role specifically, I lead a new initiative called Inside Infrastructure. You're probably wondering what we mean by that. And I'm going to give you the very short version. Otherwise, I can talk forever about it. But what we're trying to build, it's essentially, imagine like a sat nav that is meant to guide people, the expert, but also people, places, and communities from problems to solutions. To do that, we are essentially implementing two main components, what we refer to as data and insight products, tools, resources to share more lights around poverty and related issues, but also social and economic injustice and inequality in the country. And we hope by doing so to create a shared movement around better use of data and evidence. This is a fairly new initiative which we've been developing over the last year. And to your point about why I love data, well, the honest answer will be I'm a geek and I love data. But the official one will be that data is knowledge and knowledge is power. By power, I mean not just empowering those in charge of making the decisions, the policymakers, you know, the vast number of organizations available out there, but potentially to bridge the gap between people, places, and communities, those individuals that described by the data and the decision makers. So one of our core missions is to bring into the picture people with lived experience and to not in an extractive way, but really to empower them with information that they can generate and help us and others generate to influence real social change.
Great stuff. Thank you, Rosario and panel. So to set the context for the conversation today, we want to start with a short presentation from Hannah to tell you a bit more about our State of the Nation report and our findings. So over to you, Hannah.
Thank you, Kari, and good morning to all of our attendees. So I'll spend the next 10 to 15 minutes giving you a summary of 3 of our key findings of this year's report. But just first, moving on to the next slide, I think it's important to look at what the problem is that we're trying to solve. So we know that there is insufficient data on social care. And when leading data organisation DataKind was asked to review the social care data landscape, they found what you can see on your screen here. So insufficient data is collected on the areas that matter most, including the outcomes for people who receive care. This means it's not possible to understand what's happening across the social care sector. It also means that policymakers, commissioners and providers are not able to make robust decisions to improve the lives of people who receive care. So 3 years ago, when the Access team was still at MenCap, we identified that advice providing organisations hold a lot of social care data. And it was there with the help of the MenCap data team that we set up a pilot to see if we could pool data held by different organisations to gain a better collective insight. So just on to the next slide, briefly about the project. You can see our members there in front of you, but a quick overview of the object really of our data collaboration project, which is to take data from all participating organisations and really understand, but with an enhanced level of understanding, social care insight. This project hasn't been done before, which I'll come on to in a minute, but the object was to really see if we could pull individually our individual data sets. So this year, with the help of our new head of data, Amit Kohli, we've been able to bring the project in-house for the first time. And we've also grown the number of participating organisations. So with over 300,000 individual social care queries contained in the data set overall over a 4-year period, we now have enough data to compare the state of social care across the nation, both pre and post pandemic. So a quick overview then as to how we did it. Some practical considerations really on this slide. So starting with helplines codes, how do helplines actually capture data? And the answer is quite differently. So we're all talking about the same issues, but we're recording them in quite different ways internally, which can make this type of project quite difficult. So the first step is to match everybody's data to a universally agreed code. And we can then export and cleanse that data from each participating organisation to one set of universal themes, which I'll come on to talk about in a minute. But first, before we talk through some of the key themes, I'll give you a 60-second introduction to social care, which you can see broadly in the four stages, in front of you. So most of you will know that social care is the support that older, disabled people and carers receive in their own home, a care home, or in the community to live fulfilled lives. So to access social care, the first step is to get an assessment, a needs assessment that you can see there at the start, to determine what sort of support might help you. And local authorities have to ration the support they provide because they don't have funding to help everybody. So the second step is to apply the eligibility criteria to determine if you do have eligible needs. And if you do have eligible needs, you move on to the care planning stage as the third step. And a local authority should prepare your own care plan and run through that journey with you. And lastly, you're looking at charging. How much am I paying for my social care? And there will be an assessment as the fourth step to work out exactly what that is. And unfortunately, workforce and funding challenges mean that public bodies are struggling to meet the needs of everyone in their local authority area. So on to findings. What did the data tell us? The first thing to note was that advice organisations are providing nearly 30% more social care advice compared to pre-pandemic figures. And some of the significant advice-seeking themes involve inquiries about assessments, care planning, charging, advice for unpaid carers. Some of those things we're about to come on to. If we start with assessments on the next slide. Just a reminder then on needs assessments. What is a needs assessment? This is the legal process through which local authorities will understand a person's needs. It's a really important step, and it's the gateway to care and support. And what did we find? We found that the volume of people seeking advice on needs assessment rose by 123% over the last 2 years. If we hadn't been working together collaboratively on this project, we would have known at an individual level that we're all seeing an element of increase at slightly different times for many of us, but we wouldn't have been able to zoom out and really get an overview of, is this a trend across the sector, or is it just our organisation seeing this? So I think it's really enabled us to understand what the trends are as a sector overall. Some of the key issues then, which are on your screen here, starting with how to get an assessment, what will happen during an assessment. So we saw an increase as well in local authorities refusing to assess somebody and people reporting a delay in getting an assessment. So you can see a lot of the queries are quite broad in their nature, but they all relate to that one very important legal process. And in our experience, it's highly likely that if you have a problem at the assessment stage, you're probably going to go on and have significant problems with your care plan, with your experience of what social care is. So this was, it's a big part of our report, and we delve a bit deeper within the report as to what some of the other issues are. So if we look at a short case study. So Abigail's case on the screen in front of you helps to illustrate, I think, what data means to a real person. So as you can see at the top, Abigail is 28. She has autism and a learning disability and lived in supported living accommodation, was doing very, very well. And when COVID arrived, her needs increased. And why did they increase? Because her life changed significantly due to lockdowns. Many of her friends moved out of the accommodation to move back in with family. Her staff team had periods of sickness, and her access to day opportunities was severely limited because many of those services closed in lockdown. So all of those factors combined led to Abigail experiencing anxiety and distress, which meant that very quickly she needed more one-to-one support hours to help her cope with that change. So as you can see, a review took place in December 2020, and that review failed to identify the need for a new assessment. And as you can also see, by October 2022, despite an earlier request in the January, there'd still been no assessment and no increase in support. Abigail's mum was forced to give up employment in absence of any other options, and Abigail had to move back to the family home where her mum took on full-time care. So financially, that was a significant struggle, and they contacted a helpline at that point, and that had been over a year and a half since her needs had increased. So the case touches not just on one of the key assessment themes, but also on the very challenging impact these issues have, not just on the person with care needs, but their families too. So let's look at our second theme on the next slide in relation to carers. So carers was a major theme in this year's report, and our participating organisations experienced a stark 80% increase in queries. And again, all organisations saw a level of increase in queries from carers, albeit at different times. But the project really allowed us to zoom out again and begin to assess the overall volume and scale of the problem. So what are we talking about when we talk about carers? We're talking about unpaid informal carers who are often, but not always, family. And the first point on the slide then relates to concern around the carer's own assessment process. But taking one step back from that briefly, some carers reported that they didn't know and hadn't been told that they're actually entitled to an assessment themselves. And others reported concern about the quality of assessment or the length of time it takes to receive support after an assessment. And for many other carers, a lack of appropriate respite provision available to them meant that life became increasingly difficult, particularly from the outset of the pandemic. So if we move on to a case study. The Tom's case, I think, highlights the pressure that unpaid carers come under when trying to secure additional support. And let's be clear that this support would actually help them to continue in their own caring role. And as you can see at the top of the slide, Tom has autism and lives with mum Jill and dad Gary, whose own health condition had been increasingly worsening. Tom's annual review took place as planned in February this year, and again failed to identify legal processes that should have taken place. So failed to identify that Jill should have had herself a carer's assessment. And the review also failed to identify that Tom needed himself additional hours of paid support. And Tom's social worker incorrectly stated that Tom's needs didn't warrant additional support, which fundamentally ignored the needs of Jill and the family more holistically. And she was becoming increasingly isolated and exhausted in her caring role. And we found throughout this project that this is sadly the unsustainable position that many unpaid carers find themselves in. Moving on to our final of the three themes this morning, quite a stark figure here. So 95% increase in legal queries across all helplines. And sometimes helplines don't have the legal expertise to advise on complex and specialist legal issues. And these are issues that will often require advice on issuing pre-action letters or on formal court applications. So it's extremely concerning that the number of callers assessed as needing to speak with a legal advisor had increased by 95% compared to the pre-pandemic figures. And some of the key issues that required legal advice are all displayed on the slide in front of you. And it can include assessments and care plans, advocacy, direct payments, but ultimately any of our project's universal themes could require specialist legal advice. So it's worrying that since 2010, there's been a 77% reduction in the number of social care cases taken on by community care, legal aid lawyers, and 67% of the population don't have access to a community care legal aid provider in their local area. And those reductions are not about demand. We know this from the helplines data. The issue is that problems with legal aid mean that fundamentally taking the cases on is just loss-making for legal aid lawyers. They can't afford to do it. So the significance of these issues can't be overstated, and the rule of law relies on accountability. So in other words, the knowledge that should you not comply with the law, you will be accountable to the courts. And before we open up for our wider panel discussion, I'll finish this section with a concerning figure from the Association of Directors of Adult Social Services, who found in 2023 in a survey of their members that more than 3/4 of directors admitted that they're concerned they will not meet even the most basic of their legal duties. And against a backdrop of dire public finance, if citizens can't get access to justice to hold public bodies to account, the very real fear is that this figure will get even worse. So that concludes this section. I'll hand over for now back to Kari.
Thank you, Hannah. Can you tell us if there were any particular barriers to overcome with getting organisations to join the project?
I think there was inevitably sometimes initial anxiety around the concept of data sharing. So we had to work hard to explain that our organisations are not being asked to share identifiable personal data. And we also had to demonstrate to the sector that this type of data collaboration was possible and it hadn't been done before, as I say. So our first task was to establish a pilot and actually prove to the sector that we can make this work. And not only can we make it work, you can trust us. And we did this with our first report, working with a small number, a handful of initial organisations, and began to build up trust within the sector over the following months and years. And I think it was really important as part of that we were recognised as an honest broker throughout the process.
Thank you, Hannah. I'm hoping that it's only my screen that's frozen. So I'm sorry that if I've frozen for everybody else, but I can still hear you. So Amit, I'm going to bring you in. You worked on the State of Our Nation project for the first time this year as a technical data expert. Can you start by talking a bit about the state of the nation with a data lens?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kari. I want to be very transparent here and say that I came into this collaboration at the very end. I stand on the shoulder of giants. The work that Kari, Hannah, and the other colleagues have done is absolutely monumental, and I'm just very happy to have joined at a time right at the very end here to push this project a small distance forward. But that distance also perhaps is an asset because not having been invested in the process itself, I can truly see the value of what this project is. And in order to address this, we need to talk about a problem that I think plagues many of us. And it's a problem of data silos. In case you're not familiar with this term, a data silo means that there might be excellent data in a specific compartment, but if that is not shared and contributed and combined with other data sets, it becomes difficult to see the whole picture. And to illustrate this, I have a small metaphor. Imagine you have 3 blind scientists, and one of them is touching an elephant's leg, and they're saying, this is definitely a tree. And the other one is touching the elephant's tail, and they're saying, this is definitely a snake. And the third one is touching the elephant's tusk, and they're saying, this is definitely a spear. These are things that they know for sure, but when you bring everybody together and you start discussing the concept, so you break the data silo, that's when you can start saying, this is something that this might be an elephant. So that's kind of the concept of breaking down the data silo. The point about making sure that you're actually identifying that this is an elephant involves something very important, and that is diversity, right? So we need diversity in the partners that we collaborate with. And that means, we have local and national partners, we have big and small partners, we have partners that work in different topics, right? So it's when you look at a problem from multiple different directions, that's when you can start kind of understanding the system. And it's very important for a document like this, the State of the Nation, to start addressing the system of social care. Because it sounds like a triviality, but it's only when you look at things in totality that you can start understanding some of the ways that the system is broken, and especially if you want to start lobbying to make sure that certain types of data are collected. So I think that's kind of what I see is the power of this report is really the collaboration, and that is, of course, scalable. You're muted, Kari.
Thanks, Amit. I've had to join on my phone because of connection problems, so thank you. Which is quite ironic given the conversation we had on the panel before we started. So Rosario, can I bring you in? What interests you about the Access Social Care State of the Nation project?
Very good question. Where to start? So I'm going to be a bit cheeky here, and I'm going to start by echoing what Amit was saying. For me, it's the ability to break those data silos in the sense that we don't really know much about the care system, but also more importantly, I will say the experience of those providing formal and informal care, right? And same probably goes for local authorities providing that kind of service and other organizations who are working in this space. So the ability to bring to light all the different aspects revolving around the experience of those facing the issues or accessing that kind of support, it's most definitely one of the probably one of the most interesting aspects in my view. But also there is that element around collaboration, right? Taking this information, some of which is very daunting and depressing, and it must be horrible for the people experiencing this firsthand, could actually be turned into useful insight for those providing advice or services or support in this space to actually change the way they think, design, and provide support to those accessing care or in need of care. There is also a very interesting element around injustice. So you mentioned the increasing number of people that are reporting having issues accessing legal advice or being provided with the right kind of information. I would be absolutely interested to know what is the kind of social demographic profile of those individuals. Is there a trend there that we are missing? And is it something affecting those experiencing deprivation, those that belongs to minority groups or specific communities around the country? And then my last point will probably be how powerful this data is in the sense of providing almost real-time information on what's going on the ground. So for me, for instance, it will be really interesting to explore whether this data, the amazing data that you and your partners collect and then bring together, could be turned into something that is a bit more real time, almost like a monthly update of what's going on the ground. And, you know, there are so many lessons for everyone involved, directly or indirectly, to be learned from here, right? Clearly something is broken. Clearly something is not working. Why is that? There is, you know, good evidence supporting the case for everyone to, you know, take a step back and do something about it.
Super, thank you. Amit, could you talk a little bit more about the problems that arise when there's a lack of data?
Yeah. Yes to all the things that Rosario was talking about, and exactly kind of illustrating that, how do we know that minorities are not being discriminated against? Very simple questions like this. I think when you start zooming out and looking at the forest rather than the trees, you recognize that we're actually dealing with two problems. One is the problem of unmet social needs, and that's the problem that we can evidence. But zooming out, I think that there's a problem of a lack of transparency around the social care system, right? And I think that's arguably a worse problem because it becomes very difficult to understand how to diagnose and how to treat this or what it's going to take to fix this, right? So we can talk about a couple of things, for example. Do we know how the central government is allocating enough money to address social care needs to local authorities? Do we know how local authorities are deciding how much of their budget to dedicate to social care needs? This is a legal obligation, right? This isn't a nice to have. They have to provide social care. And if we don't know how they're making those decisions, it becomes very difficult. There's another kind of version of this that says, let's say there is one of the people in Hannah's case studies, and they have a problem, and they would like to contact their local authority in order to receive the assistance that they are legally entitled to, right? They go to the government, to the local authority site, and there is no information about what they can expect around an assessment. They have no idea how long they have to wait to receive an assessment. They have no idea what the parameters of acceptance are. If this information is not clearly posted, two things are going to happen. Number one, the person is not going to know whether they have received the adequate care or not. They're not going to have any way of knowing, and it's very, very complicated to try to evaluate this yourself. It's complicated for experts. Imagine how complicated it is for somebody that is not an expert is experiencing this, right? That's problem number one. Number two, at the local authority end, what this means is that they're receiving hundreds, if not thousands, of low quality letters by people that are experiencing problems and are well-intentioned, and they are articulating their problems to the best of their ability. They just don't know what to write because the local authority is not making clear what the parameters of acceptance is or isn't. Do you see how this problem kind of inflates? Because now we're dealing with, in addition to the problem of the provision of care, we're talking about the inflation of the inefficiency of dealing with a low quality product all the way up the chain. So this is why I think working on the data and adding a little bit of information to kind of dissipate a little bit of this and maximizing the transparency, I think is kind of a really high priority for us.
So that leads us on nicely then, Amit. Could you talk a little bit about your future ambitions for the State of the Nation project? What might be possible as we go into next year?
Yeah, I mean, so understanding this lack of transparency as a main problem, I believe very strongly on building on strength. So we discussed earlier how the main benefit of this project is the collaboration. We have proven that this works. We can come together and create a high quality asset, right? So I would like to expand this collaboration by both widening it and deepening it. Widening how? Well, we were earlier talking about how we have the three blind scientists, right, that are trying to identify the elephant. Well, if all the three blind scientists are all standing by the leg, everybody is going to conclude that this is a tree, right? So it is important to continue adding diverse partners. So this is a call to action. If anybody on this call has data, if you work with anybody that has data, we would love to hear from you. We would love for your voice to be included in this next State of the Nation project, right? In addition to that, we also would like to widen on a topical basis because so far we've been focusing on social care, but there are areas that are adjacent and highly related to social care. For example, housing, healthcare, maybe employment, maybe benefits, debt. There's a whole range of areas that we could spread on. We have partners working in these areas as well. So I think, taking on the concept that Hannah and colleagues worked on, these universal themes, it's a concept that works, it's scalable, and we can continue to apply that to blend different types of informations. And I think that's going to be really key because now we can start understanding, for example, the interaction of social care and healthcare, the interaction of social care and housing. We can start exploring and teasing apart a couple of these things and identifying where justice can be maximized, right? In addition to that, I would like to go deeper in terms of all the partners that we already have. Citizens Advice does something very smart. They look at the number of people that are actually receiving assistance from their trained staff, but they also look at the people that are visiting their websites. And I think it's important to kind of take a look at that. And if we can map the two using the same universal themes, I think if I have a social care problem, the first thing that I do before I talk to anybody is I go to the internet and I get informed. So that is kind of like almost like a pressure metric to identify people that are worried about a problem, but don't actually experience the problem yet, or they do have the problem, but it's not reached a certain threshold. And then when I actually pick up the call, it is almost already too late, right? I'm already in a problem and I need help with that problem. So I would love to work with our partners more to kind of explore these different kind of untraditional data sets, like for example, the weblogs and others, in order to deepen out and to tease out more. We call this signal, right? More signal in the data. We're trying to understand where things are going to go in the next few months. Talking about elephants, and if we want to use the pun of the elephant in the room, there is very little government data in this report, right? And I would like to change that. I think the government, central government and local authorities are equal partners in providing care. And if we keep having an adversarial relationship, it is going to be very difficult to identify points of intersection. So for example, we know that if people don't receive social care, a certain portion of them will be referred to the NHS to receive healthcare, which is an insane situation to be in because it is very expensive and is a very bad experience for people in which the quality of life of an entire family is being devastated by not being proactive enough. So there are areas in which there are huge win-win-wins for everybody in the community, and we need to start working with everybody to try to identify these patterns and bring everything together and see what can be done quickly and first, right? The example that I just thought of this morning, what if the central government decided to provide 50% more budget to local authorities? Let's just think of the hypothetical. And if those local authorities decided to expand their services by an additional 50% as well. We have excellent data about how many carers we have, but would that 50% result in actual 50% additional care for people? Would it be more? Would it be less? Where are the inefficiencies in the system? We have excellent information in some places and terrible information in other places. So I think we cannot answer that question today. And if we can't answer that question, then there's very little we can do about the system. So I think this is why it is very important to start bringing government information into this. And I think the sooner we do this, by 2024, I think the report will be a lot better. So yeah, elimination of ambiguity as much as possible, Kari.
Great stuff. Thanks, Amit. So Rosario, I'd like to bring you in again just to tell us a little bit more about the work that Joseph Rowntree have been doing around data, and particularly working with citizens around the use of data. So could you tell us a little bit more about your work so far and your ambitions for the future?
Absolutely. How much time I have? No, I'm kidding. I'm going to keep it short. Yes, so I use the analogy of the sat nav at the very beginning of the session today, and this is probably the best way to describe what we're trying to do. There is plenty of information out there, some of which is good, others arguably is not that good. But what is really missing, and this goes beyond the kind of social and charitable sector, is an infrastructure that has the ability to bring everything together into one place, not because we love data in large quantities, but mostly to nail down the problem around how useful and accessible and democratized that data is. Right. So this is what we're trying to do, really. We are aware that most of the official statistics available out there, they don't really speak to the diversity and different identities and characteristics of the communities out there. So that's one of the many issues that we're trying to solve by generating new and inclusive data. We also know that the data is not really timely. Let's be honest. Official stats are great, but by the time these are published, they probably speak to 6 months or 1 year or 2 years back in time. It's useful for monitoring. There is huge value in that, but really it's not fit for purpose when it comes to informing action now in the present. And we know that we are experiencing times where things change on a daily basis. So this is another aspect, but I would say more importantly, touching on what you just said, Kari, is what are real people in all of this? Data is not just binary numbers or, nice stories that we can attach to our, reports, etc. It's information about people and should be crucial for people to use that information. I refer to data as knowledge and knowledge as power before. So we should, and it's our responsibility to bring those with lived experience of the issues that we care about into the picture. So among the many things that we've been doing, probably I'm just going to kind of touch base on a couple of projects that we've been prototyping. One is called Grounded Voices. It's for the first time in the history of the foundation, we managed to establish a direct link with people with lived experience of poverty and related issues, and to bring them into not just helping us generating much more powerful insight, but also to shape what our policy ask and campaigning, and also what our programs of work should be. Just to give you a very brief overview of the project, we're working with up to 150 people with lived experience across the UK. They are interacting with us, and we are interacting with them through a series of, apps, tasks. They fill in diaries, and essentially they tell us what's going on in their lives, not just the negatives, but the positives as well. That's a really important learning curve. We should move away from the deficit model we're all so obsessed with, because yes, we know there are issues out there, but maybe there are solutions that we're missing as well. A local level, something that could be scale up, potentially a regional or national level as well. The other group that we work with is called GPAG, which is the Grassroots Poverty Action Group. It's a group of 15 individuals, again, with lived experience, have been supporting JRF over the last 3 years and a half. They act almost like a sounding board for the inside infrastructure and all the things that we do at JRF, but also the work that we do with partners. And it's mostly to make sure that what we do is respectful, proportionate, and moving in the right direction. so that we can, abandon the ivory tower where we've been sitting for a while and actually get a real sense of what's going on in the lives of people with direct experience of poverty. But there are also other things that we're trying to co-create and build to support the sector and those providing as direct support, advice. I can mention, for instance, the Northern England Insight Finder, which is a resource available entirely open source online for people to get data at a local level. So it's a triangulation of different data sets available out there, looking specifically at three spotlights: economic security, housing, and health. Now, these are just some examples, okay? And I'm not going to delve into like a great deal of details because I'm conscious of time and I don't want to bombard people with too much information. But what I would like to say, just to kind of end up on the infrastructure, our ambition is for real social change to happen with a diversity and variety of stakeholders around the table. We need to break the barriers between those coming up with programs, ideas, and solutions, those experiencing solutions in the first place. We really need to be open and transparent, but more importantly, to be open about risks. We need to take risks if we want to change the status quo. This is not going to happen if we stick to our usual ways of working, usual ways of thinking about data and thinking about real people with real experience of the issues that we're trying to solve.
Strong call to action there, Rosario. Thank you. So can I just pull us back before we go to questions to just think about the State of the Nation project, given what you've just said about involving citizens and that democratization of data, and also that idea of really using data not just to look backwards, but perhaps to find solutions. I'm curious about your thoughts on what success would look like for the State of the Nation project. Where would we need to get to make a difference and really achieve real impact?
Yeah. Very good question. I would probably focus on 2 points. One is I would like to know more, and I think everybody else out there should know more about the experience of those trying to access service provision, care, etc. And I know that we've seen, you guys have shared with us some really powerful stories about the kind of, inequalities and injustice, lack of information, how the assessment are not fit for purpose. There is issues around quality, etc. But also, kind of building on what I was saying before, is there any indication of cases and places around the country where things are actually working the way they're intended to? And if so, what is happening out there? Is anything, any approach or process that could we could take away and scale up, right? But also what it means for people to experience this, array of issues and to navigate the system. It can't be just about numbers, right? So there is a multidimensional aspect to this, which is physical, emotional, social, and financial, of course. But we tend to be fixated way too often on the financial aspect of things. Maybe we need to make this more human. And I think you're on the right track with that, because what we have seen today speaks to that experience, to that human element and lack almost of connection and dialogue between the system and those in need of support from the system. And the second point will be, I would be very interested to know how your different audiences, partners, and collaborators are interacting with the content that you put out there. Do they find it useful? Is it accessible? How can they turn that information and insight into action? What is preventing them from changing the system? We of course we know that there are financial constraints and all sorts of things happening, for instance, at local authority level. But I will be really interested to see what difference can be made in the short and medium term, and of course in the long term. Can we fix the system? Or maybe it's not about fixing the system, it's about changing the system, a system that is not really representative and speak to the current reality of things, but it's maybe outdated and not financed and supported in the way that it should be. And actually, if I may, I would like to add like a third and final point. We tend to forget a lot how charities and social enterprises and charitable organizations play a key role in filling the gaps the statutory provision is not able to fill. And quite frankly, I don't know where those people that we talk about today and society overall would be without the charity sector. So maybe this is also an opportunity to make everyone aware of the actual extent of the impact that the charity sector has in supporting a society that could be better.
Thank you, Rosario. So I'm going to attempt to summarise what we've heard from the panel today. You might have seen me frantically typing in the background. And whilst I'm doing that, can I invite all of our webinar attendees to use the Q&A function if you have questions for the panel today. So just to summarise then, we've heard that to be successful, data projects should really help society to shine a light on all aspects of a problem. So that really lovely analogy from Amit around blind scientists trying to determine what an elephant is. And if you can only see one part of the data, it's quite difficult to really understand and get the insight of the whole problem or the whole solution. We've heard about the importance of having both the numbers, so the quantitative data, as well as the qualitative data. So really hearing voices of people with lived experience to shine light on those numbers and really help us to understand them. We've heard how data can be a catalyst for social change, that it can be a way to drive evidence-based changes to services, to solutions. And we've heard as well that it's important not to focus on what's wrong, but perhaps to gather data on what's right and what's working, so that that insight can really feed into how we move forwards with better solutions. We've heard about the importance of data to transparency and how JRF and Access Social Care are seeking to involve citizens in data projects. So this real democratization of data, both involving people with lived experience in the design of data projects and determining what the outcome should be, but also the importance of citizens interacting with the data themselves to perhaps drive that momentum and that drive for change. We've heard a little bit about Access Social Care's and JRF's plans for the future, and in particular the intention to grow the number of partners on the State of the Nation project and to add more themes and data sets as we move forwards. And then finally, that last shout out from Rosario around how data can really help charities shout about their own impact and display, the real power of the charitable sector. Okay, so I'm going to kick us off with a first question. How can people contribute, panel? How can people join the conversation about data? So Rosario, I'll go to you first, and then I'll come to you, Amit.
I'm assuming that by people we mean not just experts and those working in the sector, right?
Exactly.
Well, we need to create a space for that conversation to happen, right? And it doesn't need to be a one-off conversation as part of a research project where we say we spoke with, 2,000 people who are complaining about X, Y, and Z. So I think we should be brave enough to embed in our programs of work that participatory element. As a foundation, I think there is a role for funders to support that aspect of the work financially as well, and maybe also to join those roundtables where you have charities, foundations, service providers, and people who are experiencing those issues in the first place. And we need to take an humble approach to how we use information relating to those individuals. I think for way too long, we've been using case studies just to showcase the extent of the need and how what we do is important, which is important. I'm not arguing with that. But we need to rethink how we use information and maybe to move away from using information to co-creation and co-planning what we're going to do with that.
Thank you, Amit.
So if I can just follow on that, I think one of the main problems that we have, and with all due respect to the colleagues in the sector, is that data maturity in social care is low. People get involved in social care because they want to solve human problems, and expertise to process that information, to identify generalizations, and to kind of take it from the place where we are discussing throwing 2 clams back into the ocean to saying we have a problem with clams washing up into the ocean, into the beach in the first place. I think that's missing, right? So I think there is a little bit of data leadership that needs to be made available to everybody to, first of all, proactively reach out to people and say, hey, Hannah, the data that you are gathering is important and needs to be included with the rest of our data to be able to interrogate from a place of strength what some of these numbers the government is putting out look like, right? We were just discussing this with Rosario yesterday. You have a small charity of 2 people that are doing their best to try to fix the lives of people in their community. They have no idea that what they are doing is data. They do not feel empowered to participate in the conversation because that is not their priority, right? Nobody gives them money or not money by publishing data. What they do is try to save this specific case. So I think this is where, as strange as it sounds, communicating the message that whatever you are doing is data. The reports that you are producing are data, right? We live in a day and age, and by now everybody will have heard of ChatGPT. This is kind of a new brand of AI, which is a type called a large language model, these LLMs. They allow us to process documents and achieve things that have never been done. We are truly at a place where AI and data collaboration tools allow us to cause a disruptive change. But we need the voice of people who don't know their voice is important, right? I think that's the kind of challenge that we need to solve. So the only way forward is spreading this message saying, everybody's data is important. Whatever you're doing, it is important. It needs to be brought into something like the State of the Nation and disseminated all together within the correct context.
Thanks, Meet. So we've got 2 questions in the chat. We're going to turn first of all to Robbie's question and then to Dan's. So Hannah, I'll bring you in, and then Rosario, you might have something to add quickly. So Robbie's question relates to funding. How important is it that this type of data aggregation is funded sustainably if it's to have long-term value? And if it is important, where do you think that funding could come from? So Hannah, I'll invite you to comment, and then I'll come over to you, Rosario.
Thanks, Kari. I think I'll start with the last question and move backwards in terms of where the funding could come from. I think increasingly funders are interested very broadly in social justice and building social movements on the ground. And this really speaks to what Rosario and Amit, you were just talking about. I think it's important to have a conversation with colleagues. Amit, you said we all have data. We're at a place now where data collaboration tools allow us to think about that disruptive change in relation to can we create a social movement. So I think if we can have that conversation, start the conversation, keep that conversation going, keep that on the table, I think funders will be very interested in that as a social movement piece. And in terms of how important it is that it's funded sustainably, I think it's crucial. You know, I think this project has proved that we can collaborate. We're looking specifically at social care, but obviously we'll think about looking at other issues. It's vital that we keep collaborating, and to do that, it will involve sustainable funding, because it's, again, that element of starting the conversation, building the momentum and keeping the momentum, because we know that will work.
Rosario, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
Well, I second everything Hannah said. I think it's important to, what I will add is probably make sure to have that discussion around purpose. Why is data important? We know that, but how you can actually, bring kind of enhance what the usefulness of data is will revolve around a common shared purpose. So again, going back to the kind of element of co-creation, rather than just responding to call for proposals, funding, etc., we need that conversation to happen more often than ever before, where we identify commonalities and co-design purpose and what a program of work and the underlying data could and should be used for.
Great stuff. Thank you, Rosario. I'm conscious of time, so we've got one question left from Dan. Following from Amit's point on further investment not necessarily equaling an equivalent percentage increase in support, there have been calls for an injection of around £7 billion worth of funding to restore social care eligibility and support, I think to 2014 levels. And that's a Health Foundation figure. In light of today's data presentations, does that funding proposal need to be further reviewed to inform our joint influencing work prior to next year's general election? So really interesting question, Dan, and I'll come in if I may. I think the first point is that there's not enough knowledge across the social care sector of how that £7 billion has been arrived at. And I think that even the Health Foundation would quite openly agree that the way that government is determining sufficiency is very different than the way that the Health Foundation is determining sufficiency. And I think really what's needed is more transparency around those sufficiency calculations. We need, as a whole country, to be really understanding what data is being used to arrive at those calculations, and is it the right way to do the calculations? So I would say yes, more work is required. I think that we have been doing some work at Access Social Care around trying to dig deeper to understand what data is being used, and that project is in progress. If anybody would like to speak to us about that project, please do get in touch. So I'm going to close the session now, and I'd like to give a really big thank you to our panel, as well as to everybody that's come to the State of the Nation webinar today. Our aim has been to put this project on the map, and we hope that you've been inspired, because we want our data movement to grow. And with that in mind, I've got 3 calls to action to close the session today. Firstly, if you've enjoyed the webinar, please tell a friend or a colleague about our work. We want our State of the Nation reports to be shared so that people know that they can come to Access Social Care for data insight that they can use in their own work, and so they can use our data and really track what's happening across the social care sector. Secondly, if you're from an organisation that has data, if you're curious or knowledgeable about data, please consider joining our data community. You can get in touch with us via our website at accesscharity.org.uk, or you can contact Hannah on hannah.hewish@accesscharity.org.uk. And I think that we can send out contact details to all attendees after the session. Finally, if you can see the benefit of this project and you would like to see it grow, and if you can afford it, please consider supporting us. There's a link in the chat if you're able to make a donation. So thank you once again to everybody that has come to the session today. I'm really grateful for our panel's contributions, and please do get in touch. We're really keen to grow this project, and it's great to see so many people come and listen to the session today. Thank you.